Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're cracking open a stack of sources that get into a pretty profound identity crisis within the academic world, specifically in cultural studies.
Mhm.
It's all about the role of complex theory, and we mean that with a capital T, and helping us navigate a world that feels like it's run out of political roadmaps.
It really does.
So our mission today is, I think, pretty straightforward. We're trying to get a handle on a central paradox.
Mhm.
Cultural studies has its roots in this deep political commitment, Birmingham School in the 70s.
Right, a very political project.
But now, its traditional models for political action feel, well, they feel defunct. Mostly because free market capitalism seems to have won the day. So, what do you do when your toolkit is obsolete?
That is the question.
We're going to trace how a new generation is actually turning back to some really dense, difficult intellectual work-high theory from thinkers like Agamben, Derrida, and Deleuze, not as an escape, but as maybe the only tool left to invent a new kind of political practice.
It's a necessary tool.
Exactly. So first, we'll look at the institutional pressures pushing theory out, and then we'll dive into the radical ideas theory is bringing back to the table.
And to really get the scale of this, we have to go back to the beginning, to Stuart Hall at the Birmingham Center. He was very clear about their foundational political commitment.
Okay.
They were trying to find, and this is his phrase, an institutional practice in cultural studies that might produce an organic intellectual.
Right, organic intellectual. That's our first bit of jargon we need to unpack. For anyone who isn't familiar with Gramsci's concept, what are we talking about here?
We're talking about an intellectual who isn't just, commenting from an ivory tower.
Right.
They're structurally connected to and actually emerging from a living, breathing social movement. It's that direct link between theory and organizing.
So the intellectual is organically tied to, say, the working class or whatever the emerging historical force is.
Exactly. But that's precisely where the problem is today. Hall himself admitted that even back in the 70s, they couldn't quite put their finger on the emerging historical movement they needed to connect with.
So the ambition was there, but the political subject was a little elusive.
Very elusive.
Mm.
And now that difficulty has just been magnified, 100-fold. We're in a period where the victory of neoliberalism, of free market capitalism, it just feels so total.
So if the old movements are gone, or at least much weaker, the question becomes, where do we even find a political subject worth theorizing for?
Which leads to this vital debate about what political movements even look like now. Are they the old kind, like the British New Left or organized feminism, things you can identify?
Or are they something new?
Or are they this new, much less structured thing, this disorganized, decentralized, multitudinous form that you see in, say, anti-capitalist protests or environmental movements?
And if it's that second one, these decentralized, global, networked movements, then the old political language just isn't going to work.
It won't connect at all.
So when we hear thinkers use concepts like Agamben's coming community or Hart and Negri's multitude, what are they fundamentally saying about this new political subject?
They're saying we need to get past old ideas like the people or the proletariat. Those were unified subjects defined by what they had in common.
I see.
The multitude is different. It's this vast self-organizing network of diverse groups who share only one thing, a refusal to be commanded. They're linked by their differences, not their unity. And you need radical theory just to even begin to see that.
Okay, so this all points to high theory being the essential mapping tool for politics in the 21st century. But here's the paradox. If theory is the solution, why is it being pushed out of the academy?
It's a vicious circle. It's really driven by the neoliberal restructuring of the university. Our sources point to at least 7 interconnected factors that are, they're killing theory.
Let's unpack those.
The first is just the crisis of the left itself. I mean, since the Cold War ended and unions got weaker, radical thinking is often just dismissed as being out of sync with the times.
If the political project collapsed, why study the theory that went with it?
Why bother? Exactly. Second, the marketization of the university. Neoliberal cuts forced schools to chase external funding.
Right.
And that means they prioritize research with practical questions and applied outcomes. Abstract, philosophical theory, it's just not seen as useful in that way. Sociology might get a grant, but high theory struggles.
And that pressure to be useful bleeds right into the third point, doesn't it? The rise of the new economy.
It does. We now put this huge premium on intellectual property, on ideas as assets. And what's fascinating is that this new economy often loves traditional humanist themes.
Like creativity or subjectivity.
Yes, all those things are seen as profitable in business management, and it's often explicitly positioned against the anti-humanism of theory. I mean, if theory says the human subject is just a cultural construction,
That doesn't really sell in a corporate training seminar, does it?
not at all. Which brings us to number 4, the creation of the creative industries. It's a feedback loop. Academics studying creativity get funding, and artists are told to become cultural entrepreneurs.
In theory, which critiques all of this, is just seen as unprofitable, heavy baggage.
Precisely. Then, moving to the cultural pressures, there's the celebration of the public intellectual.
The idea that you have to communicate with ordinary people and avoid jargon.
Right. And while clarity is good, of course, the side effect is that dense, challenging ideas, the ones that force us to rethink everything, they get sidelined for easy sound bites.
Then we get to the really practical institutional stuff.
The soul-crushing stuff. Number 6. The sheer lack of time from the audit culture. Academics are under relentless pressure for measurable outputs.
More papers, less time.
Exactly. You just can't afford the hundreds of hours it takes to really get your head around Derrida or Hegel. Speed kills deep thought.
And finally, number 7.
Changes to academic publishing. The market for the specialized academic book, the monograph, has just collapsed. So presses focus on accessible introductions for undergraduates.
Which means it's incredibly hard for a younger scholar to publish a difficult, theory-led book that could actually move the field forward.
And you put all 7 of those together, and you create an environment where the most complex, important thinking is pushed right to the margins because it's seen as unprofitable and impractical.
That is a powerful institutional critique. So, okay, we have a structural crisis, capitalism 1, and an institutional crisis where theory is being squeezed out. If we can't take our politics for granted, what does theory actually offer us other than just more complexity?
This is where we have to bring in Wendy Brown. Her critique of what she calls anti-political moralism is the key.
Okay, tell us about that. Anti-political moralism.
Brown describes moralism as a reproachful, moralizing sensibility. It's a stance that it so loathes power, overt power, that it ends up feeling hostile towards politics itself. You know, the methy domain of struggle and compromise.
So it replaces actual critical analysis with a set of pre-approved ethical positions.
Exactly.
But hold on, is it fair to call all ethical outrage moralism? I mean, isn't there a risk that focusing on paralysis dismisses valid moral clarity when you're facing real injustice?
That is the crucial distinction. Brown isn't critiquing having ethics. She's critiquing the tendency toward paralysis. She says this moralizing becomes a symptom of political paralysis and analytic impotence when we cling to broken political ideas.
What do you mean by broken ideas?
We keep acting as if foundational narratives like progress or rights or sovereignty are still fully intact, even when all the evidence shows they're broken. They don't work like they used to.
Ah, I see. So the problem isn't having a moral compass. The problem is using your moral convictions as a kind of analytic shortcut that stops you from seeing the world as it actually is now.
Precisely. And theory, in contrast, can be more political because it doesn't decide what politics should look like in advance. It forces you to be open to the here and now.
Which means you have to do the painful work of rethinking everything, even when you don't have a replacement for those broken narratives.
Yes. Theory is the tool for political invention, not just political repetition.
Okay, so theory forces us to question our convictions, to open up new political possibilities. Let's pivot to the practical side of this. Where are scholars actually using these difficult ideas right now to reinvent cultural studies?
Well, we can see 3 key frontiers where this is happening. And the first one gets back to a really old question. The question of lived experience.
Ah, the revival of experience. This has always been a major fault line in cultural studies, hasn't it? The culturalists, like Raymond Williams, who are all about experience.
And the whole way of life.
Versus the structuralists, like Althusser, who famously said experience was basically just a synonym for illusion.
That's the classic fight. The structuralists said experience is just the story we tell ourselves to hide the real economic structures that determine our lives. They thought it was theoretically weak.
And Williams always pushed back against that, especially against the Kantian idea that splits experience into like an inner practical world and an outer theoretical one.
And this is where Deleuze and Benjamin come in with what some call a superior concept of experience. They say Kant created these artificial conditions of possible experience, what our minds can consciously process.
But in doing so, he left something out.
He excluded the subjacent conditions of real experience.
Subjacent conditions. Okay, what does that mean in plain English? How do we talk about experience if it's not just a subjective illusion?
For Deleuze, experience isn't about consciousness or telling a story. It's non-representational. He calls it an immanent field of intensities.
An immanent field of intensities. Let's translate that phrase.
Okay, think of it less as a story you tell and more as a pure feeling or a force, a jolt. It's a multiplicity of lines and dimensions that affect you before you even have a chance to make sense of them.
So theory gives us a rigorous way to talk about lived experience, the very thing structuralism threw out, by seeing it as a field of forces, not just a belief in your head.
Exactly. It's the foundation for a reinvented culturalism.
Let's move to the second frontier, which is maybe even more provocative. It challenges the human at the center of everything, the posthumanities.
This is a really interesting argument. It basically says that cultural studies, for all its good work critiquing hierarchies of race and class and gender, is still locked within an unexamined framework of speciesism.
So it always assumes that the subject of analysis is, in the words of Kerry Wolf, always already human.
Always. The classic critique is that CS has a race or a class problem. The posthumanists are saying it has a species problem. It's always the human story. And it ignores the vast network of non-human things, technology, animals, the environment, that produce that story.
And to break out of that, they're turning to thinkers like Friedrich Hitler.
Hitler's German media theory, yes. He argues that all our social, cultural, and epistemological structures presuppose technological conditions of mediation.
So technology doesn't just transmit our culture. It fundamentally produces our sense of self. The subject is a historical byproduct of specific media, like the typewriter or the film camera.
Right, and this leads to some really wild thought experiments, like the one from Manuel de Landa. Imagine a robot historian, an AI writing history.
And how would that AI see us?
It would see humans as little more than industrious insects pollinating an independent species of machine flowers. Just a flash in the evolution of the machine.
The point isn't just that tech is important. It's that if technology's feedback loops evolve past human processing power,
Then authors, editors, critics. We all become strategically disposable. It forces cultural studies to radically question its focus on the human story.
Okay, so if the first two frontiers change what we analyze, the third one changes how we analyze. It deals with political certainty. This is Derrida on secret and legitimacy.
And the idea of the secret is obviously so relevant today. Think about political scandals or intelligence claims, like the chain of secrets around the Iraq WMD claims.
The whole 45 minutes claim being sexed up.
Exactly. The common idea is that a secret is a piece of information that's hidden and can be revealed. The surface depth model.
That's what Derrida would call the conditional secret, the thing someone is actively hiding.
Right. And the deconstructive argument is that we get so obsessed with that specific conditional secret that we completely ignore the unconditional secret.
And the unconditional secret is?
It's the inherent undecidability of knowledge's legitimacy. It's the risk of illegitimacy that haunts every single claim, every statement, every political position. It's the recognition that at rock bottom, our knowledge might be built on nothing.
That deep uncertainty, the aporia or unresolvable difficulty of authority.
Yes, and admitting that is vital for a field like cultural studies.
Why?
Because cultural studies has always faced this suspicion of being a con, a scam, a swindle. When the field tries to get legitimacy from rigid political positions like moralism, it's avoiding its own internal aporia of legitimacy.
But embracing that risk, that lack of a firm foundation, that's the path forward.
It's what forces the field to invent rather than just repeat.
So what does this all mean for the future of cultural studies? It sounds like the new project is all about invention and performance, not just repeating old political positions. The goal is to be, and I'm quoting here, as sprawling, diverse, focused, multi-perspectival, and effectively charged as Koolhaas's project.
And that reference to the architect Rem Koolhaas is crucial. He theorized things like hyperdevelopment in China. The point is that the new theory has to be performative. It has to create the context it's talking about.
So it functions like little bombs that scatter thoughts and images into different linkages.
Beautifully put. This is a cultural studies that repeats the inventiveness of its own tradition, in every sense of the word after. It comes after Hall, but it's also following in his innovative footsteps to forge a new path.
And if we connect this back to the bigger picture, this deep dive really points to a huge shift in what academic work even is.
It does. The new economy, neoliberalism. They've made the university a much more important political site than it used to be, because academics depend more and more on that institution for their very existence.
So if intellectual independence, that space for deep, non-profitable thought, is going to survive, it has to be actively fought for. It can't just be assumed to be safe.
Not anymore.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you, the listener. We have to look at our own contexts. And we have to ask, what institutional or cultural space in your own life requires fighting for right now against this relentless logic of corporatization and audit culture?